It started with a hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, you need to leave the courtroom now." Anne looked up. The officer's tone wasn't a request. It was an order wrapped in condescension. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't made a sound. But to Officer Rick Holston, a black woman in the front row, was disruption enough. "I'm here under clearance," she began, reaching for her badge. But he didn't care. "Save it. You're not supposed to be here." He grabbed her arm. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Someone shouted, "Hey, you can't do that!" But Rick didn't pause. With practiced authority, he pulled her from the bench like she was just another name on a report he'd close without a second thought. Then came the moment he would regret for the rest of his life. The judge slammed her gavel. "Enough. Do you even know who you're dragging?" Rick turned, confused. The judge stood, her voice cutting through the murmurs like glass. "May I introduce to the court, Dr. Anne Hathaway, Chief of Police, Charleston PD." For the first time, Rick's grip loosened. His eyes darted, trying to reconcile the authority in front of him with the woman he just manhandled. The silence was loud. A 12-year-old girl sitting at the back hit record on her mother's phone. 47 seconds. That's all it took. No editing. No music. Just raw footage of a white officer dragging a black woman out of court. And realizing, too late, she outranked him. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Police chief removed from courtroom by own officer. Charleston's new leader disrespected in public. A badge isn't enough, especially when you're black. City Hall scrambled. The mayor called a late-night press conference. "Charleston does not tolerate abuse of power," he said, voice hollow from political panic. But the damage and the clarity was already done. The next morning, Anne didn't take questions. She didn't fire back on Twitter. She sat alone in her office watching the video again. She didn't flinch at the part where her arm was yanked. She paused instead at the look on Rick's face when the truth hit him. That was the look she had seen too many times in her life. The face of a man who realized too late that power no longer protected him. She opened her secure portal and typed one word: mirror. A code name. A protocol. A reckoning. Later that afternoon, someone knocked at her door. Jalen Morris, early 30s, black, quiet eyes. "I saw what happened," he said. "I was there, and I've seen that man before." Anne studied him. There was something in his voice, a quiet tremor that wasn't fear. It was history. "You knew Rick?" Jalen nodded. "He put me away 7 years ago, said he found drugs in my car. There were none. No photos, no backup, just him." Anne gestured to the chair. "Tell me everything." He didn't sit. "Back then, I tried to speak up. No one listened. But seeing him drag you in daylight, in public, with no fear of consequence." He exhaled, reached into his coat, pulled out a yellowed slip of paper. "My intake receipt. I kept it, not as a keepsake. As a reminder that my voice was stolen, and if I get one chance to speak now, I won't waste it." Anne reached for the document. No badge, no press release, just proof of what had been buried. "You willing to testify?" she asked. "I don't care if I'm believed," he said. "I just need to be heard." Anne didn't say yes, didn't say no. She simply opened her laptop and keyed into her special access. Case EJ45, status closed. Arresting Officer Rick Holston. Date August 14th, 2017. And there it was. Time of arrest 5:45 p.m. Rick's shift ended at 4 p.m. No overtime filed, no backup listed. Checkpoint listed as inactive, and only one signature, Rick's. No camera footage. No secondary officer. No internal questions. Anne leaned back, the weight of it crashing into her chest. Rick hadn't just made a mistake. He had built a system around silence, and he'd been protected by it. Not anymore. She closed the file, looked at Jalen. "Get some rest," she said. "We're opening everything back up." Jalen nodded, but before he left he said one more thing. "I thought the system forgot me, but maybe it just needed someone like you to remember." Anne didn't reply. Because in that moment, she made a vow, not just to Jalen, not just to her department, but to every name the system had buried. The silence is over. 3 hours after Jalen left, Anne sat alone in the dark. Only the blue glow of her monitor lit the room. On the screen, case EJ45, reopened under her direct authority. But the deeper she looked, the stranger it became. No digital fingerprint from backup officers, no body cam timestamp. And then the biggest red flag. Rick's access log showed him filing the report 2 hours after his shift ended, using an admin account that didn't match his credentials. It was the 5th time she'd seen that ghost signature. The 5th case with the same phantom login. Anne had seen clean files before. Too clean. Rick never left things messy. That was his power. He buried everything in plain sight. And now, it reeked of pattern. She scanned the database. 3 similar cases. Different names, different victims, all closed by Rick. All on shifts he shouldn't have been working, all with that same dead-end shell account. Admin T. Then she spotted something else, a note hidden in the file's metadata. A brief remark in a now-deleted field, checkpoint down for maintenance. That wasn't a coincidence. That was intent. Anne leaned back, fingers steepled beneath her chin. Rick wasn't just a bad cop, he was systemic rot in uniform. And the system had let him grow. Midnight. She heard it before she saw it, the low hum of an SUV idling outside her apartment. She turned off the lights, moved to the window. Same vehicle from earlier that week, same angle, same spot, blacked out windows, engine running, watching. Anne didn't panic. She reached for her phone, hit record, and muttered, "Watch all you want." Then turned away. Let them see she wasn't scared. Jalen didn't sleep either. At 2:13 a.m. his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, picked up, no greeting, just a deep voice. "Remember your first time in juvie?" Click. Deadline. Jalen stood still, phone in hand, knuckles white. The gray SUV that had stalked him for days was gone now, but the silence it left behind screamed louder than words. The next morning, a plain manila envelope sat on Anne's desk. No name, no return address. Inside, one paper. A photocopy of a 1994 Charleston PD case. Subject, Anthony Hathaway. Victim, blackmail, fatal shooting. Stamped closed. Anne's hands trembled. Her father's case, long sealed, thought destroyed. Now it was back, placed in her office like a warning. Below the file cover, in red ink, "Walk away while you still can." Anne didn't cry. She stood, walked to the wall where a single photo of her mother hung. The woman who once stood outside that same courthouse with blood on her shirt and no justice in her hands. Anne whispered, "Not this time." Across town, in a smoky dive bar, a retired name reappeared. Lieutenant Wynn, Rick's old handler. He raised a glass across the table at 2 clean-cut men with no badges but plenty of pull. "She's digging," Wynn said. One of them asked, "What if she finds Rick's logs?" Wynn snorted. "Then she finds Rick. That's the job of a fall guy." The man paused. "And what if she doesn't stop there?" Wynn looked up, his eyes tired but cold. "Then someone needs to remind her. No one rewrites the rules, not unless they want the game to end." Back at Charleston PD, Anne called an emergency meeting, 6:30 a.m. before sunrise. Tired officers shuffled in. No one expected what they'd see. Anne stood at the head of the table, no slideshow, no script. Just one sentence, written in sharp marker on the whiteboard. Mirror protocol. Full audit initiated. Gasps, shifting chairs. One officer scoffed. "You're reopening 10 years' worth of closed files?" Anne's eyes narrowed. "We're reopening the lies, starting with Holston. Every case with missing evidence. Everyone signed under Admin T." Silence. Until a younger officer whispered, "We've waited a long time for this." Anne nodded. "Let's get to work." The audit began quietly, too quietly. Anne had expected pushback, but not like this. Not whispers in the elevator. Not empty looks from officers who once greeted her by name but now passed like she wasn't there. She didn't need confirmation. She could feel it. The department had split, and the silence had picked sides. In the middle of that divide was Marcus Linwood. He stood in front of his locker, staring at the mirror protocol memo pinned to the board. Jalen's name was on it. So was Elijah Porter's. So was Rick's. So was his. Marcus had never touched a suspect, but he remembered that night. Elijah Porter, just 16, bloodied in the holding cell. Rick had said, he slipped running. Everyone knew it was a lie. Marcus said nothing. That night, and the one after, and the one after that. Now his silence was staring back at him, on paper. Anne wasn't surprised when Marcus knocked on her door. "Close the door," she said, before he could speak. He did. Marcus sat across from her. No badge, no uniform, just sweat on his brow and a file clutched like a lifeline. "I kept this," he said, "from 2018. I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't sleep if I shredded it." Anne opened the file. Photos. Elijah's injuries, dated and stamped by the nurse, and edited in the final report. Rick had removed half the images, signed it solo. Marcus's signature never appeared, not because he didn't see, but because he refused to sign. Anne looked up. "Why now?" Because, Marcus said, when you walked back into that courtroom after he dragged you out, I saw the system flinch for the first time. I figured if the system can feel pain, maybe it can heal. Anne didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just whispered, "You're not the only one." Word of the Mirror Protocol spread outside Charleston. In Baltimore, an independent journalist named Ava Monroe requested the case files. In Atlanta, an internal whistleblower cited Anne's memo to push for review. And in Chicago, a quiet request came from the DOJ. Send us everything. Anne knew she was triggering something larger than Rick, but she also knew the walls would fight back. And they did, through shadows. One morning, Jalen found his apartment door ajar. Nothing stolen, just a single folded note on the kitchen counter. "You were guilty then. You'll be guilty again." He didn't tell Anne. He just folded the note and slid it behind the same calendar he kept from prison. Day 1. He would not be silenced this time. Back at the station, Anne's internal tech chief, Meena Patel, called her in. "You need to see this," Meena said. On screen, IP logs, cross-referenced with internal admin accounts. 4 flagged entries, all traced back to Rick's office terminal. All at hours no one was scheduled. But here's what chilled her. They weren't old. The latest one was 4 days ago. "Who has access to Rick's login?" Anne asked. "No one," Meena said. "It was supposed to be terminated when he was suspended." Anne stared at the screen. "Then someone either kept him online or is using his name to clean up the past." Meena hesitated. "Or to bury what you just dug up." Anne stood. "Pull every case Rick touched, flag anything reopened recently, and trace who authorized the deletions." Meena paused. "That might expose more than Rick." Anne nodded. "I'm counting on it." The next envelope didn't come by mail. It was slid under Anne's door by hand. Inside, a list of names, victims, ages, arrests, all filed under the same classification. Low priority, no press risk. Anne's heart sank. This wasn't incompetence. This was design. At the bottom of the list was a scrawl. "This is what Rick was built for. This is what Raleigh paid to protect." Anne turned toward the window. The city outside was still unaware. But inside, the storm had started. That night, in a distant house lined with dust and metals, Philip Raleigh sat watching the local news. Rick's name flashed again, followed by Jalen's face, then Anne's. He reached for the remote, turned the volume up. A reporter's voice cut through. "Charleston PD confirms full review of internal misconduct files. Mirror Protocol now involves 14 flagged cases linked to former officers." Raleigh laughed softly. "Foolish girl," he muttered. Then he picked up the phone. "Win? We may need to move faster." But Anne wasn't slowing down. She called a closed meeting. No press, no PR, just her, Meena, and 3 officers she could still trust. On the board, she drew a circle. Inside, Rick, Admin T. 5 ghost cases, 1 civilian death. Then she drew lines outward, to Marcus, to Jalen, to Elijah. "This is not about one officer," Anne said. "This is about a system designed to erase pain and call it protocol." She paused, then circled the whole board in red. "And now, we're going to make it remember." The memo leaked at 7:42 a.m. Anne hadn't even had her first coffee when her assistant stormed into the office, holding a printed sheet like it was radioactive. Someone inside sent this to the public eye. Anne took it. It was one of hers, a confidential draft from the Mirror Protocol review, dated 3 days earlier. Marked preliminary only, do not circulate. But the damage wasn't the leak. It was the headline now blasted across every feed. "Police Chief Hathaway targets white officers in witch hunt." The article quoted anonymous insiders claiming Anne's investigation was a personal vendetta driven by grievances tied to her father's history and an obsession with dismantling police tradition. A line in bold, "If this continues, morale will collapse, and with it, public safety." Anne scanned the comment section. Finally, someone says it. "She's here to burn it all down." Another diversity hire with a chip on her shoulder. The silence she'd built her movement on, measured, deliberate, was now being used against her. Across town, in a diner where every booth had a view of a mounted flat screen, Rick Holston smiled into his mug. The leak had worked. Even in handcuffs, he knew the game. "Just make her the storm," Wynn had told him once. "Make her the story, and they'll forget the truth." And they were. The backlash had begun, but Anne didn't flinch. By noon, she called an internal meeting. No suits, no script, just her and a wall of raw evidence. Jalen's intake forms, Elijah's doctored photos, Logs, files, deleted timestamps, all pinned like battle flags across the whiteboard. She turned to the group. 20 officers, some shaken, some silent. "You've read the leak," she said. "Now read this." She gestured to the board. "This is not about me. It's not about revenge. It's about facts. And if that scares the department needs to ask why." No one interrupted, but one officer, Sergeant Vance, 17 years in, raised his hand. "I don't agree with the leak," he said, "but you gotta understand, for a lot of us, this feels like pulling out floorboards in a house we still live in." Anne nodded. "That's exactly what it is." She stepped closer. "Some of you will lose sleep. Some will lose friends, but what we build next will not be on top of rot." That evening, while Anne reviewed case logs alone, her screen flickered. A direct message. No name, no photo, just a file. And a single sentence. "You missed one. Case C4297B. She opened it, a scanned internal memo from 2015, marked classified internal use only. The name, Devontae Marks. She froze. The file had been purged from the system 2 years ago. No backup, no trail, not even on the DOJ retrieval list. Yet here it was. Devontae was 17, arrested on suspicion of theft, never charged, never released. No death certificate, no witness, just gone. The memo ended with one line. "Case resolved. Subject permanently removed from inquiry list." Anne sat back, heart pounding. This wasn't just neglect. This was erasure. Meanwhile, Jalen stood on the roof of his apartment, staring out over the city. He didn't know about the leak. Not yet. What he did know was that silence had started stalking him again. Yesterday, a black SUV trailed him for 3 blocks. No plates. This morning, his work locker had been broken into. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. He could feel it, like prison without bars. But he wouldn't run this time. He took out his phone, clicked record, and said, "If anything happens to me, look at Rick Holston. Look at case EJ45. Look at Devontae Marks. Look at the system and ask yourself why one voice is more dangerous than a badge." Then he pressed send, uploading it directly to the Mirror Protocol portal. "Let them watch now." At the same time, Anne called Mina again. "I need everything on Devontae Marks. Internal, external, cross-reference federal inquiries, hospital logs, even private court memos." Mina's face darkened. "That name's red-flagged in the system, not just hidden, locked, as in federal override only." Anne exhaled slowly. "Then break it. You realize that's—" "Break it," Mina nodded. It was already too late to turn back. At Charleston's old archive storage facility, beneath a dusty concrete floor and 2 levels below the public records wing, an intern opened a misfiled box. He was looking for 1997 traffic reports. Instead, he found something else. A photo, dated 2015. A teenage boy, thin, scared, surrounded by 3 officers. One of them was Rick Holston. Another, unmistakably, Philip Raleigh. The file was labeled C4297B hold. The intern didn't understand what it meant, but the next morning, the file had disappeared. Only this time, he had taken a photo of it first, and he emailed it to Anne. The echo chamber was cracking, from the inside. At exactly 7:12 a.m., the emergency lights flickered on in the Charleston PD server room. Access breach. The night team had flagged it just minutes earlier, a remote login attempt using a ghost admin account last seen 2 years ago. The same alias from the Devontae Marks case. Anne was already halfway to the precinct when the call came. "They're trying to wipe it," Mina said through gritted teeth. "They know we found something." Anne didn't need to ask who they were. By 9 a.m., the building was locked down, IT sealed off, power rerouted to isolated servers, backups encrypted. And in the middle of it all, Anne stood with a printed version of the photo the intern had found. Rick Raleigh, and a kid whose name had vanished, until now. No one spoke, no need, because the silence said everything. They tried to erase a human being, and someone inside had helped. Back at her office, Anne stared at the file again. C4297B, Devontae Marks. She searched everything, old desk calendars, legal faxes, hospital intake reports. Nothing, until Mina found a ping. A private transfer order from 2015 sealed, not public. Subject transferred to offsite holding, facility K3. Status reclassified, administrative custody. K3 wasn't a jail. It was a privately contracted detention center. No oversight, no cameras, no paper trail. Anne's blood went cold. They hadn't just buried Devontae's case. They buried him alive. Meanwhile, in a half-lit parking garage, Rick Holston sat across from Wynne. A meeting no one was supposed to witness. They're getting too close, Rick said, voice low. Wynn sipped his coffee like this was all routine. You should have handled Devontae better. I thought he'd break, Rick muttered. Wynn's gaze sharpened. He didn't. And now, she's coming for the door you left unlocked. Rick leaned in. Then lock it, again. Wynn paused, then said only 3 words, "It's too late," and walked away. Anne stood outside Facility K3 by nightfall. No camera crew, no badge, just a court order signed that morning. Inside, guards stalled, shuffled, made excuses. No such name here. Records were lost in a fire. But Anne had already pulled the floor plans. She walked past the guard booth, past the elevator, straight into the East Annex. There, in holding room 12, she found him. Devontae Marks. Thinner, older, but alive. His eyes didn't light up. Not yet. Not when trust had been starved out of him. Anne didn't offer promises. Just a name. I'm Anne. I'm here because they tried to erase you. And I'm not letting that happen again. His voice cracked. You know what they called me here? She waited. Ghost file said I didn't exist, that no one was looking. Anne reached into her bag and pulled out the photo. You're not a ghost. You're the reason they're falling apart. He stared at it, then back at her. For the first time in years, he blinked like someone waking up. By morning, the headlines exploded. Erased youth found alive in private holding, the forgotten case they never wanted you to see. But the story wasn't just about Devontae. It was about every door like his. That day, Anne issued the backdoor ban, a legal executive order halting all administrative custody transfers without judicial review. From now on, every file moved, every name deleted, every ghost erased, would be tracked, logged, and open to public audit. She stood on the precinct steps as reporters gathered. You want a quote? She said, voice clear. Here's one. If you open a back door to bury justice, don't be surprised when the truth walks through the front. Behind her, Devontae stood silent. Not because he was afraid, but because the world was finally listening. The courtroom wasn't full, but it was loud in its silence. No one dared whisper as the judge entered, not because of protocol, but because every soul in the room knew what today meant. Rick Holston stood at the defendant's table, no uniform, no shield, just a man stripped bare, flanked by lawyers who looked more like undertakers than defenders. In the gallery, Elijah Porter's mother, Jalen Morris, Marcus Linwood, and now Devontae Marks, alive, present, unforgotten. Anne didn't sit. She stood quietly in the back, hands folded, no notes, no prepared remarks. Her work was already done. The judge read the charges, then the verdict. On all counts, guilty. Not a gasp, not a cheer, just breath, finally exhaled. Rick didn't speak, didn't flinch, but his knees buckled slightly as they cuffed him, and this time, no one looked away. Outside, it rained, not a downpour, just a steady, quiet drizzle as if the sky itself was washing something old away. News crews lined the courthouse steps, but Anne didn't speak to them. She walked straight to the sidewalk, where a group of students stood in silence, holding handwritten signs. Justice took time, but it came. Don't stop the mirror. Say their names. Keep saying them. Anne nodded once, not as a leader, as a witness. Because justice isn't thunder. It's the echo that remains long after the storm. She walked off into the rain, coat damp, eyes steady. Behind her, the courthouse door closed with a heavy final thud. Not of punishment, but of history being sealed with truth. And somewhere far from cameras, in homes once quiet with fear, people started to believe something they hadn't to hope in years. This time, silence lost.